Hello everyone, Jamarcus here, and I'm here with the power rankings for Showdown Ultra Ball Season 2 of the SPDA. I thought it would be fun to make a little video for doing a tier list on all the teams that were drafted, who I think has the best team. I want to preface by saying this is just my opinion. Someone who's a lot better than me might say something else. I'm bringing my own bias into this. I like top-heavy teams. I like teams with the fewest amount of Pokemon. Um, and I like pretty offensive teams. So if yours don't fit that, I'm going to rank it a little lower. That's just me. Also, you don't need to have a good team to have fun. I think it's totally fine to just play draft with your favorite Pokemon. So if that's what you're doing here and you get ranked a little lower, I think that's fine. Just go have fun. To start off, since I imagine this is going to take a while, let's talk about Sweets' team. He was round one. I'm going to go through in draft order. So looking at Sweets' team, he picked up Pult round one. I think that's the right play. Every finals game I've ever been in included the Pult, whether it was me using it or my opponent. Um, this team, very solid top five, very scary. You got your Dragon Fairy Steel right off the bat. You have your double Dragon with Raging Bolt. I think that's totally fine. Um, a little Fairy Weak, maybe you're kind of relying on Iron Treads um, to check the fairies. Otherwise, you have Quillfish and Charizard as resists, which, they're your lower tier pieces. They're not going to be coming every week. Um, but honestly, Primarina can check other fairies pretty well with just how bulky it is. Deoxys Speed, I'm really a fan of offensive sets. You have quite a lot of hazard potential. Spikes on Deoxys, spikes on Chestnut, and spikes on Quillfish. And then rocks Deoxys, rocks Treads. Only two rockers really. A little unfortunate maybe, but that's fine. Really good hazard removal in Treads. A lot of pivot options. Your top four all have pivot moves. Um, and Quillfish is a pretty good slow pivot as well. I think your lower tier picks in Charizard and Morgrem are pretty strong. Morgrem helps take off screens pressure from Pult and Deoxys. My biggest gripe with this team is some of the resists. There is no freeze dry resist outside of Terra Fire Jug and Terra Steel Chestnut. So the Kira matchup is pretty scary. Then also maybe a little fairy week, like I said, and a little ground week. I mean, your top five, you're going to be bringing to most weeks, I imagine, don't resist ground at all. So you're kind of relying on Chestnut and Jugulus, and then Charizard if it's showing up to check the ground types. But I think Chestnut is actually a really good ground check, so I think it's okay. This team's pretty strong. I'm going to put it in A tier. Definitely one of the better teams this league, I think. Next up is Renellen's team. Spectrier as your first pick, alongside some good supportive pieces, Tinglu, Klefki, and Cobalion. I actually think support Spectrier pretty well. Having a good fighting type of Cobalion and Breloom, which are both in the mid-range of points, so they're not one of the best fighting types by any means, but they're definitely helping check those dark types that Spectre struggles with a little bit. You also picked up Tinglu, which is the best Spectre check, pretty much. So that's one last check for your opponent to bring into you. I think ENAMT is a little underrated. Um, I think agility sets work pretty well. It's great bulk. Draining Kiss heals you a lot and great coverage as well. Healing Wish is also fantastic. Suicune, I'm not a believer in. I think it's a little one-dimensional and easy to prep for, but can do some cool stuff like extreme speed. You got good hazard potential with Klefki, Tinglu, and Clodsire, and your hazard removal is just Avalokisui with Terra, who I think is good, but as your only removal, maybe a little unfortunate, especially with all the Pokemon on your team that don't really want to run boots but might be forced to, like Enamorus and Rotom. Would have liked to see a little more offensive potential on this team. I feel like there's a lot of bulk and a lot of passive mons like Tinglu, Suicune, Klefki, uh, even like Rotom and Clodsire. So another big special breaker would have been nice alongside Spectre, I think. But still definitely a good team. Something you have to prep for. I'll give it a B. Next up, we have All Grass Starter, coach of the Sweeping Sceptiles. I'll try and remember your team names. Um, Iron Valiant as your first pick. I like it. I think Iron Valiant plus Zapdos is a really good core. I think offensive Zapdos is actually really strong. Kingambit's really nice, checks those poison types that Iron Valiant kind of loses to. Um, I will say Gengar as your only fairy resist is probably the weakest part of this team. Gengar doesn't like switching into moves very nice, so having something else to resist fairy would have been nice. I think Latias with Healing Wish is pretty cool. Um, Also just set up sets. Screen Sableye I think is pretty strong. Dragonite is there too, who is a Pokemon I really want to draft. I think it's underrated for sure. Triple Ghost is certainly interesting. I I get like the Gengar plus Sableye or Gengar plus Dusclops. I don't really know why Sableye and Dusclops are both here. Feels like they kind of have overlapping roles, especially with the similar Terra types as well. Um, I like all the offense on this team though. There's not a lot of passive mons on this team. Latias can be a little passive, same with Sableye and Dusclops, but like even Donphan just hits hard. I think picking up Donphan was the right play, gives you some removal alongside Blastoise, which is nice. So besides the glaring fairy weakness, I think defensively it's pretty good. Freeze dry, again, another problem for this team. King Gambit as your only resist. Definitely a little scary. So I will give this a B tier. I think it is probably a little bit better than Renellan's team. I'll try not to compare like one to one quite as much. Next up, who is this? This is FC Lauren, coach of the Harlem Haxorus. And they picked up Palafin, which I think is very scary. And Palafin Kyurem is a core I see quite a bit. I think it's pretty strong. Kyurem really helps check those bulky waters that beat Palafin. Screamtail's a great support piece. Scizor is really underrated, I think. Uh, I think it's not great as removal, but just SD, Life Orb, Bullet Punch can really break through offensive teams and even sweep pretty well. Blissey, I think is tough to use in draft. It's really easy for your opponent's special attackers to prep for it and find a way to beat it, whether they are Psychic Noise or Taunt, or maybe they just bring a physical move. Terra Incineroar is interesting. I think setup sets like Terra Grass Trailblaze will be interesting. Obviously, it's Flame Charge as well. Then defensive sets with just Parting Shot, U-turn, that sort of thing is pretty strong as well. Um, I like a bulky Scizor with click and U-turn to get in like a Specs Kyurem. That could be interesting. And then Glimmer is also there as well for the hazard support and extra hazard removal as well, which is nice. Terra Rotom Fan's pretty strong, and Dusknoir as well. Dusknoir is a nice spin blocker alongside Glimora. A better Ghost type might have been nice, but you can't ask for too much. I think this is a pretty solid team. Uh, Seems like we're gonna have a lot of B tiers, but yeah, I'd give this a B tier as well. All right, next up, I believe this is Potato, isn't it? Let me find the team. I'm just scrolling through my phone to look at the teams because I don't want to switch tabs. Yes, this is Potato. We see Urshifu, Rapid Darkrai. I think that's a great offensive top two. Um, they just work really well together, I think. And then Archaludon, I think, is a little overrated and hard to use. Again, it's just a steel type that doesn't resist fairy. But then you pick up Ogerpon next, which is a decent fairy check as well. Your removal is Wheezing with Defog, which is pretty good. You don't have a lot of hazards on your team, so you're not worried about getting rid of your own hazards. Then Ogerpon's a really nice physical breaker for Urshifu Rapid Strike in the late game. And then Landorus and Carnot, who I'm not a huge fan of. I just recently used it, and I did win that league, but I didn't use Landorus very well. But having another special breaker alongside Darkrai and Archaludon is pretty nice. I will say your Terra Captains are pretty weak. Raichu Alola and Ice-Q, both on the lower end of points. And then you picked up a Pelipper to have kind of a rain mode with Archaludon and Urshifu Rapid Strike. Definitely not something I think you need to bring every week, though. This team certainly functions outside of rain. Pretty top heavy. You have 5 Pokemon above 16 points, which I don't mind. As for defensive profiles, Ground Weak, not too bad. You have Double Flying type and Levitate Wheezing. Freeze Dry, Your only resist is Ice Cube. That's pretty tough. That's also part of our Chaladon being your steel type that doesn't resist ice or fairy. Uh, but yeah, an Ogre Pond or Weezing as your fairy checks, and I guess Doug Trio. Something a little bulkier could have been nice. I think this is a good team. Nothing crazy. I'll give it a B tier. At this point, I'm not really ordering the teams in B tier all that much, I'll be honest. Alright, who's up next? This is Indirect Swing, isn't it? Yes. So, Gouging Fire, great Pokemon, really strong. I'm just looking for things that support it. Zapdos Galar, I think, is a good pick alongside it. I think it's hard to only have one big physical attacker because your opponent can just bring a good physical wall and you're gonna have a tough time. So having something else to break down that physical wall so that your Gouging Fire can sweep in the late game, I think is really strong. So Zapdos fits really nicely here. Um, on the special side, you have Terra Normal Noivern, which I think is a very strong Terra Captain. You have Webs with Rabombi, no spin blocker when I see, or no, sorry, there's Petrant. I'm sorry, a great spin blocker. Webs plus spin block and gouging fire I think is really strong. Like a banded gouging fire under webs is definitely something that opponents will have to prep for. Terra Serena, very strong as well. I've used it before. I really like it. It is not your only hazard removal because you have Noivern as well, so pretty good hazard removal here. Uh, but as for hazards, your only rocker is Hydreigon. Am I seeing this right? Yeah, your only rocker is Hydreigon. Wow. Um, pretty much no hazards besides the webs and then rocks Hydreigon, which I think is unfortunate. I think that's a bit of an oversight. I don't really know if Raikou is necessary on this team. I'm just not a big Raikou fan, if I'm being honest. Although your team's pretty flying weak without it, so I think it's reasonable. Revavroom no Terra, I think, is not that great of a Pokemon, and I don't know how necessary it was on this team, especially because you already have that Grounded Poison. So I think maybe getting a better Steel type um, would have been nicer. As for speed tiers, Rabombi, Noivern, yeah, you got some good speed there. So no gripes about that. I think this is a strong team. Um, I'm going to start moving a couple teams down to C, just because we're getting too many teams in B tier. Um, but on to the next team. Tobacito, I believe, right? Yeah. All right, we got the Sun team. This team is scary. I would not want to face it. Roaring Moon. You don't see Roaring Moon Sun a lot. People usually uh, go for Gouging Fire Sun, I find. But I think Roaring Moon Under Sun is fantastic. Like even just Scarf with attack booster, faster than everything, OHKOs everything, terrifying mon. Walking Wake, similar, just OHKOs everything, faster than everything. Heatran on Sun's great as well. Lando really helps you with a lot of rolls, gives you a good ground resist, which your team really struggles with otherwise. Rotom, same thing, helps with the ground types. Ninetales, very happy seeing Ninetales drafted. I think it is leagues better than Torkoal, uh, mostly because of the speed and healing wish. Florges as your fairy type, I don't mind that at all. I think it's actually a pretty decent Pokemon. Terra Rhyperior is certainly strong. And then two one-pointers at the end is certainly interesting. Um, I think a Hatterum's actually pretty decent though, as a one-pointer. Hitmontop as your removal. I'm just checking is that your only removal. It is. I think Hitmontop sucks, if I'm being honest. I've used Hitmonchan before, and it was not great. I think Hitmontop's best set is probably like Scarf, Triple Axle, if I'm being honest. I think like Assault Vested boots just aren't bulky enough, and your bad defensive typing doesn't really get you anywhere. And no knockoff on this thing is also really tough, because then it makes ghost types just switch in pretty easily. Besides that, though, I think the offense on this team is just crazy, and I think Terra Victory Bell under Sun is actually pretty strong as well. I'm gonna give this an A tier. Definitely a scary team. I like how offensive it is. Next up, we have Alkenic or Thomas, coach of Seattle Swamperts. This team is incredible. Great Tusk Enam is a fantastic offensive core. I think physical Enam's a little underrated. When I used it special a lot, but in hindsight, even just like physical with superpower or mixed are both great. Okerpon Wellspring, I'm usually not a huge fan of this thing. It gives you spikes though, which is nice. And then Terra Jolteon on this team is really good. You need the speed, so it'll be good. Terra Flying, Water, and Ice. I think Terra Fairy is easily the best typing on Jolteon. I'm surprised to not see that. Terra Fairy, Alluring Voice, plus electric moves is just very tough to switch into. Although Terra Ice and Water helps against the ground types, which I do like. Terra Flying, I think Terra Grass would have done the same thing, but helps with coverage a little more. So definitely some different Terra types I would choose. Pheasant is nice, gives you a bulky pivot to get an Enam and Tusk. Um, Terra Chandelure is also really interesting. I don't think I've ever actually seen it used, but it seems like it should be very strong. So excited to see that. Empoleon slow pivot as well, just to get those top three in, will be really nice. As for hazards, you don't have a whole lot. You have like rocks on Azelf and Wigglytuff and Rhydon down at the bottom, and Empoleon actually. So you have quite a few rockers. Only Spiker in Ogerpon is a little unfortunate though. Would have liked to see a more uh, a bulkier Spiker, like an Overquill or something. Besides that, though, I think the top three is just so incredibly strong, and it's supported very well from the lower half. So I'm going to give this team an A tier. Next up, who do we have? We have Mr. Jason Glade. If I can find a team. I probably have it up on screen before I found it. Here we go. Oh, this is the Greninja team. I love Greninja. Great draft mon. Um, I've been looking at this team a lot because I'm so intrigued by it. It's so bulky. Um, like Slowking, Galar, Clefable, Swampert, Corviknight. So much bulk um, that I feel like you don't have quite enough offensive potential. You're really relying on Greninja to be getting the kills this game or with this team. You do have the Thunder as a great special breaker, and then Ambor a great physical breaker, and then some lower tier mons. I think Terra Beartic on Hale's actually pretty strong as well. But just seeing Greninja as the premier breaker, I think it's a little weak for that. Although I do think this team's really strong otherwise. It supports Greninja very well. A lot of slow pivots, Swampert, Corviknight, and Slowking Galar especially. Um, Getting the double water with Swampert I think is a great play. Greninja as your only water type leaves you a little vulnerable to other water types I find, and um, having Swampert for that, although it doesn't resist water, it's just I think it's a good pick. I've used Swampert as well. Great mon. Bramblegast and Corviknight as your removal, pretty strong. As for hazards, Greninja of course, but then rocks on Swampert, and then spikes on Bramblegast. Not too bad. Your only rocker is Swampert, a little unfortunate. You have Lycanroc as well, but that's again lower tier mon. It's a pretty good team. I like it. I'm gonna give it low A tier. Who's up next? Dragonite. Who is Dragonite? This is Hilamalo, coach of the Drowsy Dragonites. We see Urshifu Single Strike. Very, very strong Pokemon. Really helps uh, break down those fairy types for the rest of your team. Usually I like to see a strong dragon type drafted alongside this Pokemon. It's really good at breaking down fairy types, so that a strong dragon type like a Dragonite can sweep late game, but your dragons on this team are Cyclizar and Flapple, uh, not the best dragons around, certainly. Goldengo, fantastic pick alongside Urshifu, really helps you against the fairy types that beat you. Uxie and Ogerpon gives you a lot of hazards. Terra Kilowattrel is fantastic. Cyclizar gives you some removal, that's nice. Sylveon, honestly a great special breaker. That thing with specs hits very hard. Also just pretty bulky as well. Toxapex gives you great bulk. And your grounded poison, of course. Arcanine's cool, gives you priority, which your team's kind of struggling with otherwise. besides Sucker Punch. Um, and then helps you with fairy types too, although your team's not very weak to fairy. And then Flapple Cloth, I think, are both decent low tier Terra captains. I think this team's very solid. Um, very strong Terra captain and Kilowattrel. Good speed with Kilowattrel Cyclozar. Um, yeah, not a lot of complaints, honestly. I think it's a good team. We'll put it up in A tier. I think it's probably a little better than this one here. We'll move that down to B. Next up, we've got Pochop with probably the best logo I've ever seen in draft, if I'm being honest. All right, this team, another bulky one. We got Sneasler and Weavile, uh, the duo, I guess. Great physical presence, those two alongside Rillaboom. A lot of good bulk at Gar, Goodra, Moltres, Gastrodon, even Orthworm. Regieleki for the speed, which you were kind of struggling with. No, you weren't. You have a Sneasler and a Weavile, I'm lying. But Regieleki helps again. Meowstic for screens, I think, is nice. Definitely not the most versatile offensive team. I think it's kind of limited at what your offensive options are each week. Um, but I think they're good options, so I don't think that's a terrible thing. Um, as for resists and that sort of thing, definitely a bit ground weak, although you got 3 immunities, so not actually too bad. And the grassy terrain support helps as well. I'm interested to see if Garg can be good without Terra. I've never seen it used in draft, to be honest, because nobody drafts it. So it'll be interesting to see for sure. Terra Mismag, I think, is really strong, actually. I would choose the exact same Terra types. And the Terra Gastrodon, really nice bulk, gives you some hazards as well. Regieleki as your hazard removal, something a little better would be nice, but there's not 16 good hazard removal options, so you can't always get what you want. I think this is a fine team. I'll give it a B tier. I think I'll put it around there somewhere. Next up, this is Aiden, coach of the New England Pidgeots. Fantastic top three, a lot of speed. Um, one of the fastest teams in the league, probably outside of Sweets' team, with Deoxys Speed and Dragapult. So we see Iron Bundle, Torn T, Cinderace. Cinderace is a great pick alongside Hatterene here. Those top two really hate running boots and they don't like rocks. So having really strong hazard removal in Cinderace and Hatterene is nice. Terra Monkey Dory, I'm usually a hater on Monkey Dory, if I'm being honest. I don't like it. With Terra, I think it's definitely better. Will be interesting. Ogerpon, I think, is another fantastic Pokemon. For 12 points, it gives your team a lot. Gives you knockoff, which you were struggling with a little bit prior. Another Spiker, or actually your only Spiker, I think, or maybe they gave it spikes to Quack. I don't remember. Um, Biggest gripe with this team is Duraludon as your Steel type. You're very fairy weak. Monkey Door is really your only fairy check on this team. Although Cinderace can actually check some fairies too, especially if you bring Gunk Shot. Como is interesting. I think this thing struggles quite a bit, unless your opponent just doesn't have a fairy type. Um, but definitely interesting. I think the top three is incredible though. A lot of fast pivots at the top, alongside Monkey Dory and Ogerpon. It's actually such a fast team. I'm just looking at it now. Wow. A slow pivot would have been nice though. Electrode Hisui with Terra is also strong. Another fast pivot. Um, yeah, I think like Hatterene dissuades opponents from bringing Trick Room, which is nice. Because your team is so weak to Trick Room otherwise. Pretty much everything on your team's over base 100, except for Hat, Quag, and Duraludon. Um, Interesting team for sure. I'll give it a bit of a higher B tier, I think. All right, next up is Burb with a pretty interesting team. I see a Chi-Yu, which I like. I think Chi-Yu's good. It's a really good special breaker, so I'm hoping to see special attackers that benefit from that. And when I look at this team, I see Latios, and that's kind of it. Like another big special attacker would have been nice. You got a lot of bulk on this team with Gliscor, Tentacruel, Fortress, Shaman even. So I think another big special attacker would be cool. And then there's just an Iron Boulder on this team. This team definitely needed speed, so I get why Boulder was drafted. I just think that there's not a lot of other physical attackers on this team, so Boulder's going to struggle to break through those steel types. I guess Latios is actually pretty good at breaking down steel types as well, so it fits pretty well. Chia gives you a good ghost check, which is nice because of your double psychic type. You've got removal in Tentacruel and Fortress, that's pretty good. I like seeing spinners on a team with Gliscor. The worst thing you can do is draft Gliscor plus Defog. So you have quite a bit of hazard potential, yeah, with Gliscor Fortress. Healing Wish with Shaman's really nice. Uh, Bisharp's cool as well. And then Terra Masquerade and Lantern will be interesting to see. I don't know how good they are really. Lantern and Whiscash is interesting. I don't know how necessary both of those were. I think if you could have taken Masquerade, Lantern, and Whiscash and just gotten one more good Pokemon, that would make this team very strong. But for the meantime, I think it's a little limited on the offensive potential, so I'm going to give it a high C tier. Next up, Archeon of Winter, I believe. If I can find their team. Here we go. Archeon of Winter drafts a Hail team. Who would have thought? Backs plus Ninetales, very nice. Um, we see 5 ice types on this team. So definitely going to be Rock Week, although Ursaluna's a really good rock check, which I like to see. Golurk on this team as well. You already had your ground type. I don't know how necessary this Pokemon was, but with Terra, I think it'll definitely be a hard hitter. Terra Frostmoth is also going to be fantastic. A lot of trick room on this team as well. You got Farigiraf, Diancie, Ursaluna, and Iron Hands and Indeedee. This is more of a trick room team than it is a hail team, and you have 5 ice types. Armarouge for the trick room as well. This team is terribly slow. Your fastest Pokemon is Ninetales, a low at 109 speed. And then after that, like Bax and Indeedee around the 85s. Armarouge, I don't actually know how fast that thing is, but I don't think it's too fast. Yeah, this team terribly slow. Definitely needed some more speed, I think. And the 5 ice types leaves you pretty weak to fighting as well. I mean, your top 1 and 2 are weak to fighting. Then your fighting resist is a Golurk and an Armarouge. Definitely some defensive holes in this team as a result of, the triple psychic and the 5 ice types. I think the offense is pretty threatening. I would have liked to see Terra Diancie, to be honest, although you can't draft Terra Diancie and Frostmoth because of the points. Um, and Frostmoth definitely needs Terra more than Diancie, so it makes sense. Um, you don't have a steel type. I think that's a huge weakness. Um, you don't have a grounded poison either. So your only fairy resist is an Armarouge. Yeah, the more I'm looking at it, the more defensive holes I'm finding in this team. Um, there's also no removal with 5 ice types. Um, yeah, this team, sorry Archeon of Winter, but I'm going to give it a D tier. So many defensive holes in this team. And anyone who isn't happy with their ranking, reach out to me. I'll talk to you about your team if you want to make changes. We can talk about it. Um, although if you're happy with your team and you get ranked low, prove me wrong. Please. Truly. Next up, we have the Terabit Tyranitar, who is coached by Fury, and I'm biased because I just drafted the team very similar to this. Um, it actually has Garchomp, Terapagos, Ironmoth, and Terra Slitherwing, the team I'm using. Then I have a Greninja over Meowscarada. I'm biased. I love this team. I think it's fantastic. Terapagos is my all-time kill leader in draft. Drafting it alongside Mola was um, the first time I used it. Wish support is really nice for that thing, just keeping and getting your Terra Shell back. Healing Wish is also nice, so you can even avoid Toxic. There was an Annihilape on this team before Grace, and I actually didn't mind the Annihilape on the team. I think it gave you a nice spin blocker for all the hazards you have with Meowscarada, Garchomp, Terapagos. But being traded for Terra Slitherwing also makes sense. A very strong Terra captain. Terra Bellibolt also pretty good defensively. Not a lot of defensive options on this team outside of Mola, but Mola can be a blanket check to a lot of things, so I think that's okay. Mew is also interesting. It's a Pokemon I've never used and not really faced all that much either, but I'd like to try it sometime just because of all the options it does have. You got your 1-point Sticky Web user. Generally, I'm not a huge fan of the 1-point, 2-point Sticky Web users like Ariados, that sort of thing. Like there's quite a few good Pokemon with webs, but of course you couldn't afford that here. So I don't mind it. As for speed, you got Meowscarada, good speed. Moth and Garchomp are up there too, same with Mew. And then on the lower end, going down to Terapagos, Tinkaton, Bellibolt. You've covered speed pretty well. As for typings, a little ground weak for sure. Your ground resists aren't great. Meowscarada, of course, not a good ground resist. Slitherwing, pretty solid um, into the ground types, and then Cutie Flies your other resist. I don't count that. Definitely ground weak. Um, Tinkaton, really nice, solid, lower tier Steel Fairy. I think this team didn't have a Fairy type. No, the Fairy type was a Comfey before they made some trades. So picking up the Tinkaton was actually a solid pickup. I'm not good at hiding it, but yeah, this is my favorite team in the league. This is a team I would draft. I really like it. On to the last team. We have our savior, Winter Bub, who picked up the team after we had a drop and did what he could to salvage it. Certainly an interesting team. Terra Thorns, I think, is interesting. I'd like to see that thing put in work. I've used non-Terra Thorns in lower tier and got quite a few kills with it, so um, will be interesting to see how good it does with Terra. Volcarona is something else I want to try. I think it's underutilized in draft. Definitely a scary Pokemon. Ariados, not a huge fan of this thing. And it's your only grounded poison, and your removal is Defog Manaba, so not too bad actually there. You have an Abomasnow and a Slowking, so you've got Hail, but there's not really any Hail abusers. I guess Aurora Veil plus Blaziken is interesting. Sandy Shocks does not get Weather Ball, as far as I know, so I'm not sure what the Hail mode is trying to do. Blaziken's cool though. I think it's a little overrated, kind of hard to use, but um, could be interesting for sure. Good physical breaker alongside Iron Thorns. Then there's an Espathra down at the bottom there. I've never seen this thing used without Terra, so will be interesting to see for sure. It being your fastest Pokemon, definitely not ideal. Um, yeah, you got Volcarona and Sandy Shocks around that speed tier as well. But pretty slow team. Terra Thorns is probably the highlight for me. Hazard-wise, you've got Sandy Shocks, then Iron Thorns has Stealth Rocks and Spikes, but that's not ideal. I'm not seeing the synergy between a lot of these Pokemon, but I'm sure Winterbub can put something together. But generally, I don't. I think I'm not seeing the vision, but maybe Bub can explain that to me. I'm going to put it alongside Archeon's team down in D. So there's the list. I would say these two are clearly the top two teams in the league, but I think Fury's team does take it by a decent margin. The tiers are not really ordered, as you could tell as I went on. I moved things up and down. I think these two are probably the standout teams on the lower end, um, but I'm excited to be proven wrong. I know I will be. Um, week one doesn't start for a little bit still, so be patient, please. Hold on. Um, we're still figuring things out, having some downtime before we really start up, and I'm excited to see the week one games when they do show up. Um, maybe I'll do some weekly awards or something. I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you guys are as well. I'm assuming the only people still watching this are the coaches, even if they're still watching it. Probably a long video, huh? 35 minutes. Oh my goodness. I'll shut up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.